with hold-on tanks still extremely strong. Many WOT players ask, what is better, the E5 or the Super Conqueror? Today I will be comparing these two tanks for you, showing you how to play them, and remember to subscribe for more comparisons like this. Welcome to Tank Face-Offs. Starting off, let's compare the straight line speed of these two tanks. With a top speed of 37 km per hour, the E5 is quick off the start and very quickly puts some distance between itself and the S Conq, which only reaches 34 km per hour. Weighing in at 77 tons compared to the E5's 54 tons, the S Conq cannot keep up and falls behind on the straights, just like Lewis Hamilton. With the same reverse speed, both tanks are neck and neck when backing away from ridges or reversing into cover. Let's move on to the uphill climb. With a specific power of 17.2 against the S Conq's 13.8, the E5 is once again much quicker from the starting line and is able to put its engine power to use, getting to the apex of ridges much quicker than the Super Conqueror, which takes almost 8 seconds longer to catch up. However, across prolonged downhill sprints, the Super Conqueror manages to keep up to its stronger engine, leaving it only a second or two behind the E5. Not quite what you would expect after the uphill battle. Now, what about reverse speeds? Starting off with turret reverse, both tanks boast a solid 33.4 degrees per second turret rotation, allowing them to easily keep their guns aimed at circling enemies at all times. However, the same cannot be said for the hull traverse. With only 27 degrees hull rotation per second, the Super Conqueror falls behind just slightly against the E5's 31 degrees of rotation per second. Not a huge difference, but noticeable for more skilled players, as you are able to get your hull in the correct position earlier, which is always going to be, even if it's a small advantage, an advantage nonetheless. Let's move on to the armor profiles of each tanks. Putting these tanks to the test is the S Conq's predecessor, the T115B, and its 259mm of penetration. The E5's hull is very American. It can be very trolly at an angle, but the superstructure of it, the upper hull, you are not penetrating at any given moment in time. The lower plate, of course, is very penable, and then of course you have a rather large cupola as well. The rest of the turret of the E5 is very solid. Outside of that one spot on the turret, which is rather large, but you learn how to play around it and you can kind of shield against heat with your gun. You can also see that with non-heat, for example, if you don't hit the right part of the cupola, you will simply not penetrate. Now, the E5 on the side is of course extremely weak. Things to point out for the E5 here is that the side turret is very easy to penetrate, of course, and that the ammo rack is located around the second track wheel. The back of the E5, which is the same as the S Conq in that regard, is very prone to fire HE pens as well, even by artillery, because it's a rather weak part of the tank. Now, moving on to the Super Conqueror. The Super Conqueror cupola, a lot more trolly against APCR. You need to be above it or hit the tiny bar below the cupola. Doesn't really hold up against heat. However, thing to note for the Super Conqueror is that this tank does rock a lot of spaced armor. Now, the lower plate of the Super Conqueror, larger surface area than the E5. Also, the ammo rack is located on the front, on the right. However, the Super Conqueror can be penetrated around the gun, as you can clearly see. This is a thing that most people don't tend to shoot for, but it is very possible to pen that, and it is not that hard to achieve. Well, with the E5 you can also pen the mantlet. Nobody really goes for that whatsoever. On the Super Conqueror, of course, again, very weak sides and an even weaker rear. Very prone to being penned from behind. But what the S Conq does have is a little bit easier to use armor for less experienced players. Cupola can be trolly against the right people, and it also has a lot more spaced armor than the E5. What about firepower? Well, both tanks feature 400 damage per shot, and with only 1mm difference in penetration between the standard rounds of both tanks. When talking about the ammunition, it's worth noticing the E5 has premium heat available, while the S Conq has APCR. Now, what this also means, of course, is that the E5 is going to be better with that 340 heat close range than the S Conq is. But the S Conq is the better sniper for medium and long range. As for the gun handling, the S Conq has the superior dispersion of 0.32 against the E5 0.34, while both having the same aim time. The main difference here, however, comes in the reload time. With a default of 9.2 seconds, the Super Conqueror takes longer to reload compared to the E5's 8.44 seconds, meaning in prolonged engagements, the E5 has more DPM potential with 2.85k DPM against the Super Conqueror's 2.6, which of course compounds over longer engagement and allows it to finish opponents slightly quicker. And while the S Conq does come with 100 extra HP over the E5, these vehicles look pretty even on the scoreboard. Mobility-wise, I think it's fair to say that the E5 has quite a decent advantage over the Super Conqueror, and for that, we'll be winning. When we move on to the armor department, it is a hard choice. The Super Conqueror's armor for most average players is easier to use than the E5. So therefore, I will give it to the Super Conqueror, but I feel that at a different level, you may give it to the E5. Then in terms of firepower, I would say that the E5 is simply better. With that 340 heat and extra DPM, it's an absolute powerhouse in close range engagements that can quickly chew through any opponent. That also brings us to the winner of this video. It is going to be the E5, baby. Hell yeah, America. Let's go. Now I do want to add a disclaimer here. I do believe that both the E5 and the Super Conqueror are good tanks. If you don't really know what you're doing yet, you will have better results with the Super Conqueror. But if you learn to play the E5, you will learn to love the E5. It is harder to master than the Super Conqueror, but once you do, the results can be much better. Let's move on to some gameplay. Alright. This is more comfy, but experimental turbo. It doesn't need experimental turbo. Bounces. Nice low roll. Okay. The try didn't notice me, so. Please not me again. Thank you. Goodbye. Can I? Just keep farming. Woo! Baby! They're robbing me of my 10k, guys. They're robbing me of my 10. Let's see.
I still have time to make a shot if there's somebody on the right crossing. What am I doing, guys? I mean, I still got the shot, so it doesn't really matter, but really... Fuel tanked. Armor ranked. Am I getting peeked by an I-7 from behind? Oh. I want to play this. What a peek by him, bro. There goes the remainder of my health points. Give a smitey. Right. How we do it, boys? How we do it? Woo! Almost, dude. Almost. Very good, boys. Very good.
Thank you for sticking to the end of this video. If you enjoyed the comparison, let me know which tank you prefer in the comment section below, and be sure to subscribe for future videos. In the meantime, be sure to check out this video where we compare the T57 Heavy against the 50B, or watch this old video where I go more into detail about my thoughts on the E5.